Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Finally finished the book. It was a fun read. We're getting ready to hopefully at some point the hardcover book will come, which is it's supposed to have like a few more things in it. We're not gonna read it over, but we're collectors, so we're gonna have it. But not only did we finish the book, we were able to rewatch the movie and actually now we could talk about the movie as it relates to the book and the book as it relates to the movie, because as we've been detailing the past couple of weeks, there's a lot of things that were in the movie that didn't have context that were described in the book. And I just realized, because I knew some scenes in the book I had seen already in the movie, but then when I watched the movie, I'm like, did I misremember this? And then realized like they're in the deleted scenes.
Yeah, right. They
Yeah.
deleted scenes and they're also like mixed together. Like a setting will be replaced for something that could have three things happening at once, not just like a back and forth. Like just real quick, like the first chapter we read was about Rick Dolan meeting the agent, the foreign agent,
Hmm.
and then the other chapter was Cliff in the waiting room. This you have Cliff and Rick, and you have the agent character, all in like the same area, because like that's how films to make it cheaper and just practical costs. They mix things together while having like another day shoot. So that was really interesting when I rewatched it. I remember enjoying the movie when I first saw it. It was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I saw it twice. One was like at the Alamo experience, and one was just in an old school theater that I had been going to since the '90s. I think I saw Kill Bill there, and I saw Grindhouse and all those. So it was cool to see it in both experiences. Because how Alamo is, where it's like a fun thing. They gave away like goodies,
Hmm.
but just as an experience, I remember like really being into it. I remember that summer being like a lot of work, and I was just like kind of like beat, and it really was a treat because I kind of stopped watching Tarantino movies for like a good decade.
Yeah.
I wasn't that into Glorious Bastards and Django Unchained and Hateful Eight. I only just saw that again like a year ago, and it was that different version, the Netflix version. And I go, wow, this is interesting. This is interesting, but I don't know how many times I'm going to go back to it. But I think Tarantino even called this like a hangout movie. Jackie Brown is a hangout movie. That's why that was always like my favorite. Pulp Fiction, you can jump into it at any time.
Yeah.
This, I can see myself jumping back into this in like a random scene and like not switching back and just finishing it off.
Hmm.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Like I know it caught hell. Like the response to it, the fan response to it when it first came out was kind of mixed, but I enjoyed it when I first saw it, and I still enjoy it now. Probably even more so because of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because now I know a lot more about the characters than I did when I saw it before, and right after. So watching it now with the context, I'm watching it and it's like now certain scenes have a little bit more significance, and some of that I'm gonna get into. So let's talk about the last half of the book,
Right.
or
And we,
basically like the last quarter of the book that we
yeah,
finished there.
we're gonna do 20 to 25,
Yeah.
400 pages. It was very like perfectly ordered. And that was on purpose, so it wasn't just like, oh, you knew it was about to be at the end because it was the 400 number. It was very kind of like a film where it's like 90 minutes.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe he did it on purpose, like intentionally. But so it's Sexy Evil Hamlet. That's
Hmm.
a every conversation that Rick has with the director Wanamaker, it's the director kind of hyping it up as like, think Shakespeare,
Right.
and he's like, this Shakespeare shit again, like that. And
Yeah.
that's like the director trying to make it bigger than it is, because like Shakespeare is always like, it had always been like the creme de la creme of like acting.
Hmm.
Like eventually we're going to talk about Val Kilmer. One of his things he said was, maybe by 28 or 29 I'll be good enough to do Hamlet or something like
Yeah.
that. So now I get that it's like the bar.
Yeah, so like rewatching the Sexy Evil Hamlet. So right after he wraps his big scene, on Lancer, you hear the director said, "There it is, focus, sexy evil Hamlet," and you didn't know what the fuck he was talking about when you saw the movie. But now when you read the book, it's like, oh, all right, they had this, they call it, what do they call it? Like the director giving notes. So they kind of had this conversation where he's giving them notes, like, yeah, I could see you doing Shakespeare. And one of the deleted scenes is him and Sam Wanamaker just sitting and talking, and you can see why the scene got cut, because it would have messed up like the pacing of the movie. But it was a funny little conversation with Leonardo DiCaprio as Rick Dalton and the gentleman I was playing, Sam Wanamaker. But now it provided context.
Yeah, it's layered more.
Yeah.
Going back to the same thing I said about having like an actor be like good enough or skilled enough to do like a Hamlet or like that character. In the novel of the chapter, they kind of mention how Rick is like a amateur drunk, right? And then like then they go into, again, this is why it's a great compliment to the movie. They go into the film history, which we love, and it's saying George Lee Marvin, George C. Scott. These are names that I see on TCM all the time. I know who these people are. And then Aldo Ray, they were like known as like, all right, we'll let them do their thing because that's how we're gonna get this movie done. They're drunks, whatever. They're professional drunks. And he's like, Rick isn't there yet. He's an amateur drunk. He's working on it. And I thought that was one thing that stuck out to me. And you got to remember also in this chapter, Rick as Caleb and Marabella Trudy, she kind of goes into like an acting class mode. And I didn't know this until I read while reading the book. I listened to Tarantino on all these podcasts, and it's way personal because, like we said, like he dropped out of school and his only formal training was acting class. So these are things that in his mind he remembered from back then. Maybe he was hanging out with someone back in the 80s, and this is more personal than him just adapting like Rum Punch and just turning that into Jackie Brown. This is reminding this is instilling in the idea that I had early on that this is kind of like an autobiography in a way of Tarantino, which is really cool.
Yeah.
That's why I think it translates in the film, because he goes around these stores and shops that were there when he was growing up in '69. It's his age. It's like 5.5 years old. And then at the 20 also has the James Stacy character.
Yeah.
And she's kind of, do you remember, was she like pitting them against each other, or like kind of like she was kind of like bringing up Stacy, like the swing. This is my notes. So like, remember they had that like swinging dick shootout where like who's gonna go up first?
Yeah.
Earlier on, like it was like a duel, and like he finally went up there. He said, "Well, he's the guy. He needs to come up to me." This is Trudy's way of, because she's an 8-year-old girl. This is her way of kind of a pissing contest with Rick. Like she's getting in his mind and like kind of like messing with him. That's what I got from it. It was like that cerebral, very cerebral for like an 8-year-old. And he's like, this little fucking 8-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And it's because she didn't want to probably get upstage, so that was her tool. That was her. Sometimes like actresses, like beautiful women and like older women, they'll use that to kind of steal a scene. And this was her way of kind of getting in his head. That was 20. So another very important scene in the film, it correlates with chapter 21 of the book. That's Lydia at the house. So this is when Cliff arrives at Spawn Ranch. This is a huge scene that I forgot that it was like almost a climax of the movie at one point. It was like kind of like the beginning of the third act, right?
Yeah, and what you'd find with the differences between the book and the film is that a lot of the intense, exciting action parts of the movie. Try not to use action, because when you think action with action movies, like some kind of big old fight or some kind of explosion or something. But when I mean like action, I mean like, all right, your fingers are into the armrest and you're leaning forward like, oh, I want to see what's gonna happen now. Like all of those scenes in the movie that you actually, they in the book, it's actually like subdued, or at least kind of glossed over.
Or just a sentence. Like
Right.
the flamethrower in the book is just like, that was horseshit. Don't worry about that. Remember,
Right.
then they went into like what happened in the future. Like, oh, that made him like be on Johnny Carson like 10 years later. And he was like, tell me about this whole hippie thing. Like, talk about it. He became like a hero.
Yeah. And he yeah, so in that scene, in the film, it's a tense situation because it's the first time you encounter, I wouldn't say the first time you see the Manson family, but it's the first time you kind of see the
The
Manson
lair.
family. Yeah, well, the layer, but also it's the first time you see them in action.
Hmm.
Like
Like a
where it's like,
military, yeah, where she's like, you go here, I go there, that.
yeah, and it's like you kind of use, like Quentin Tarantino uses the audience's like knowledge to kind of boost up the scene because you know present day the aftermath of what these people were capable of and what Charles Manson was training them to do, and how he psychologically prepared them to basically be murderers. So you didn't know how the scene was gonna go, but in this scene, it's really tense. He arrives and a lot of stuff that was described was played up, like Squeaky, who's the aptly named lady of the house in the title of the chapter. I hear a car. It's a strange car. Whatever Sydney Sweeney's character was, I didn't even realize like Sydney Sweeney was a lot more in the movie than I realized before when I first watched it, because this was before like Euphoria and all of that, so I didn't recognize it was her. And Victoria Pedretti was also one of the people, if you know her from the Netflix series. She was one of the characters, and she's on another series, Haunting of the Hill House or something like that. So all of these people is like you didn't really know them as stuff. Tex, the guy who's played Tex, the movie where Tom Hanks went to Australia and he got COVID last year. It was a Elvis movie. He's the person that's playing Elvis. So a lot of these people that played like these bit parts, they're actually known, went on to be known for other stuff, and they're gonna be popping up in other things fairly soon. But not to go too far off. So Dakota Fanning played Squeaky, and in the movie you watch the scene play out as the audience, but in the book you see it from Squeaky's perspective.
Yeah, so like in the book, I forgot about this until I resaw it. It's like more from their point of view, and Cliff like isn't really a factor in it as much. Like they go, oh, the Hawaiian guy is just they're just like describing what he's doing. You don't have that very intense back and forth that you have in the movie. Like it's Brad Pitt's moment to shine in this scene where he's like very intense. It's a Western set, and I think this is like probably some of the highlights of the film, in my opinion, of Brad Pitt, where he's like, is he just living there? Like it's funny, but it's also like tense, and it's like Mr. 8 Years Ago,
Mm-hmm.
But I think like where it's like, why did you read the book? Well, it's completely different from like watching a movie. Like it's both halves. You put them together, they complement them,
Yeah.
and you get the whole picture, and you get like more intensity from inside the house from the book, more from George. I didn't really care about their relationship, but I actually care about her and him, like, because it's so like a book is so personal that I was like, wow, like I'm thinking about like all the
Her
months,
and George, or her and Cliff?
George, her
Okay.
and George,
Yeah.
like you can, because it's a book, like it's very personal, and I'm like imagining them every night, like watching movies and stuff like that, and watch TV. It's like you can get why he doesn't want to be saved or whatever. Like
Yeah.
he knows what he's doing. That's kind of an allusion to I think you ever seen the Searchers, where it's like they're trying to save this person, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're with these natives, whatever, like you're with these savages, they gotta save you, and she doesn't want to be saved.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what that reminded me of, because I think they filmed it around there.
And it
So
was the way, like you say, where it's like you understand now their relationship, and you understand why he doesn't want to be saved. Now, when he turns to Cliff, like after like first being kind of really like, oh, what the fuck do you want? And he turns to him and is like, I don't know who you are, but you touched my heart today. Because it's probably very rare that anybody outside of Squeaky he gets to interact with, or anybody shows interest in him outside of the Manson family. So for somebody to come in there and like want to see about him. Like, I think he genuinely was touched by it.
Also, like his use in the world was his like ranch and stuff, and people stopped using it.
Yeah,
So these people were using it, and it's like, well, it gives me like a something to it gives me like a meaning in like everyday stuff.
yeah. He's like an
You can adapt.
octogenarian. He's an
Yeah, you
octogenarian with like poor eyesight. So of course, like he's like, my days are probably numbered. So I'm gonna try to like enjoy them as much as I can. And if you're like an 80-year-old girl or 80-year-old, like mind you, he doesn't even know what Squeaky looks like. He just knows like her voice and what she does for him. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
You got a warm bed and a hot meal and a hot whatever. Yeah, so chapter 22. I think I just said that Cliff and Brad Pitt's performance in the scene at Spawn Ranch is like up there.
Yeah.
If this was in the movie, this probably would have been a highlight of Brad Pitt because I could see this because this is not in the movie.
Right.
Okay, so chapter 22 is he transports us to a set or a location for a spaghetti western, but it's in Spain. It's an aging star. Basically, it's a version of Rick Dolan. It's Aldo Ray. It's kind of like Rick Dolan 10 years in the future, maybe, if he keeps going down the way he's going. So we're in the hotel, and we get a little history backstory from the narrator. Okay, so we like sports. So do you know Josh Hamilton, where he had his issues, substance abuse and everything?
Yeah.
He had like handlers, and he wasn't allowed to carry money. And this in Al Ray, he wasn't allowed to have the bottle. He wasn't allowed to ask for money. He couldn't have money on him because or they thought he was going to just like start drinking, and then the next day he would be on a flight home, which happens. But before we get there, it's Cliff. He's on the set. He's working. He's working as a stuntman. That's what he does. And they have a conversation in the Aldo's room. They kind of like, they're both, what do you call that? Like ex-military guys, they have like that in common, right? Or they BS vets. Yeah. So they BS about that, not to get too detailed, but they have this long conversation. And then when he finally gets the bottle, Aldo can like clearly think again. And he goes, "Are you wearing a wig?" like he wasn't even paying attention to him because he only cared about getting that thing from him. And he's like, "Are you wearing a wig?" And I can picture it all being all like silly looking, and he didn't even realize it. And then again, I like knowing that their relationship continued and everything. Rick and Cliff.
Yeah.
Where like years later he goes, "That was you."
Yeah.
Three things you do when you become an actor at SAG. You sign the SAG, whatever, something, and you don't get Aldo Ray a bottle.
Yeah. And it's like in the movie, Cliff goes into, he's driving off in the ambulance, and like that's the last of it. And of course, like the climax of the movie, with the members of the Manson family, setting their sights on the Polanski house, instead decide to go to Dalton's house because Rick comes out and just like berates them for having this noisy ass car. I just like goes off on him and like, all right, we're gonna kill this guy now.
That becomes personal.
The preceding thing was that Rick and Cliff were ending basically like their professional relationship because they couldn't afford to have him doing the things that he was doing before, which is basically being his handler and his gopher, because obviously he had this situation with his stunt work where the people in the stunt community didn't want to work with him anymore, so it wasn't like he was getting like official work, so he had to really do what it was Rick needed to get done.
I was saying before how Tarantino, this book by the end it felt like an autobiography, also a love letter to like Hollywood. So he mentions like David Carradine. He mentions the autobiography of David Carradine, and now I'm thinking maybe on set did he have conversations like this, like where he was Cliff and they're talking about old Hollywood stuff, and it was like David Carradine and him. The first actor who signed on for a Tarantino movie was my man
Harvey Keitel.
Harvey Keitel, and he could probably tell him all these stories. Lawrence Tierney, he actually was an actor in the 50s and 40s, like the film noir. Got shit on his luck. My dad actually worked with him on the trucks, like in the docks and stuff. And then he came back with Reservoir Dogs, and I wonder if Tarantino was able to sit down with him, just BS with him, and This is where he learned a lot of his history, not just from like history books. He learned it from hotel rooms, like just like in a weird, strange place. Like Tarantino always mentions like he had a great time in China, even though it was a hard production. But he partied with these people, and he met these old actors. Carradine told him old history. He's royalty, or
Mhm.
legacy.
I felt like in the book you didn't really like Cliff was present for some of the last parts of the book, but it never really gave him like an ending. So I kind of thought that, this chapter with Aldo Ray was kind of like the epilogue of Cliff's career, or I mean, Cliff's arc
Mm,
or story in the book. And like you said, it in a little like throwaway line, it's like 2 years later,
mm.
Rick found out he gave him that bottle. So it lets you know, yeah, at least reassures you, oh yeah, they still ended up being, their friendship still went on for some time.
But when I was reading this, it made me think like you could take Cliff and Rick as
Mm-hmm.
like a character exercise and just put them in different places, like different times and scenarios. And I was like, you know what? They actually did that. It was like Forrest Gump. They put Forrest Gump in all these weird, like, talking into Dick Cavett and John Lennon. Like I could picture like a Cliff. Like what would he say to the Beatles? Like if he met them, like on like the on the in LA at some point, and he was at a famous club or whatever, or iconic moment. He was there,
Yeah.
and I can picture this could be a whole series. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
And
I'm sure he
before
wrote a lot. Yeah.
before we like move on from that chapter, I just wanted to say like, did you notice it kind of started off like with Quentin Tarantino doing his trademark like time altering, where it kind of
Mm,
it's two scenes going on at the same time and they kind of like converge into one scene. Like that's what I felt when I was listening when I read that chapter.
yeah.
Like it started off from Aldo Ray's perspective, and it's like
Right.
describing a hotel room, and then it goes to Cliff's perspective, and it's also direct that is describing like a similar hotel room, but you're thinking it's two different
Mm.
hotel rooms, and it's kind of like a contrast. When in reality, it's like Cliff's in like 312, and Aldo Ray is in like 307.
Yeah. It was like meet Aldo, and then like meet this. No,
Yeah.
they actually meet up. Yeah. So that would, like you said, this would have been a good character arc closing for Cliff's character. He is in the next chapter though. So ready for that. The chapter 23, which is a lot of people have been saying like that's like their favorite chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I did like a lot of the earlier ones too, but this is up there. That again, it's not in the film. But from listening to podcasts and interviews from Tarantino, I found out that this is sort of like based on reality with one of the characters in this scene, the piano
Yeah.
player. But yeah, so Drinkers Hall of Fame.
Okay, so what I realized now from rewatching the movie is that this scene was replaced with the FBI. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
famous,
The meme.
the famous Rick pointing at the TV meme. It replaced that because in the movie they drive off the set, go back to Rick's house, and it's a fun little. It was one of those things with like friends hanging out after work where it's just like, hey man, this I got my FBI is coming on. You want to watch it? And he's like, man, I got a case of beer in the back, and let's order a pizza. I was hoping you would say that. I knew you wanted me to come in and watch the episode of FBI. So that's what happened in the movie. Now in the book, it's a more of a elaborate scene because the tension really with Jim Stacy, it wasn't present in the movie. Like you had the little parts, like the only tension you got out of it was the initial walk up. And again, it
Mm.
didn't have the same context where it's like, in the book you're reading it and it's like, all right, who's gonna go up to, who's gonna introduce who to who first? It's his show and I'm guest starring. I used to have my own show. Like there was none of that in the movie. Yeah.
In the movie, we had the whole alternate reality of the Manson bloodbath thing and the flamethrower. We had that, but we didn't have it in the book. In the book, we had the shootout, quote unquote, pissing contest, swinging dicks.
Yeah.
That was in the book. In the movie, he does the Tarantino thing, like where the grindhouse where he cuts. And it's like like you don't even see the stuff
Yeah.
because it's really
Yeah.
jarring, and it's like really jarring, and it made
It
me
was
laugh.
funny because it was a scene I actually had to kind of like rewind because it was I guess it was it was on purpose, like a continuity error. Like,
Yeah.
Jim Stacy, who's played by Timothy Oliphant, walks up to Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio, and he takes his hat off, and then it cuts back, and his hat is like back on,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
was like,
Jarring. Yeah. I'm like, what? So
yeah, and
tell me, like that whole thing. Like, we're like, you hear like you hear the real, I think, like a sound effect of it, like cutting or something like that. That's what I heard when I heard it.
yeah, and it was it played out like it did in the book, where he comes and asks him about the
Mm-hmm.
the Great Escape thing, but instead of like, because remember, nobody talks about like the Great Escape, Steve McQueen thing at all, really, outside of that scene. So you don't really know the irritation and annoyance that Rick gets when it's brought up,
Mm-hmm.
as it is in a book. Like in a book, it's like virtually like around every corner, somebody asking him about the Great Escape. Like, you were this close.
Yeah.
So what I realized in a movie, and I didn't realize it like when I initially watched it, which was they had like music cues, as if like, when you have like a headache and it start like, the headache starts like pounding. It was that kind of music
Dum dum
cue.
dum dum.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
they had a scene where they inserted him into the Great Escape. And when I watched it the first time, when it first came out, I misinterpreted that because I thought like it
Hmm.
was really trying to drive home the fact like he could have been in the Great Escape. He could have had, the career that Steve McQueen went on to have in, the mid to late 60s, well into the 70s before he died. That's what I interpreted it as. But now that I read the book, it's like, nah, in his mind, people think when they bring up this story that like they're picturing that he really could have been in the Great Escape, but in his mind, he was like, I'm not. I never really got that close.
And it's hysterical, like the elaborate story he goes into, like, if I got that, and if like, well, if Suge like missed the plane and whatever, and then it gets more and more like ludicrous and like silly. Uh and it's basically him trying to make himself feel better, like it wasn't gonna happen anyway. And when he asked him about it again in front of everyone else again, he's like, this fucking, I mean, you already asked me earlier.
Yeah,
It was like this is like the culmination, like the shootout at like the scene that they would have in the Lancer. They're having it for real life in the LA bar, wherever it is, like the somewhere LA bar.
yeah, Drinkers Hall of Fame.
Yeah, but I don't know where it's supposed to. It's somewhere like in like
There's a
the area.
Yeah, that's the name of the bar.
I thought this was fascinating because when we read this, we watched the Viper Room, and I had that in my head where it's like very similar, where it's like this is our domain, leave that shit outside, but like he brought it in and he was like busting his balls, and he's like, it's like I take his very like, this is a thing that's like kind of the back is a monkey on his back. This thing is like it's on his head. It's probably one of the reasons why he's like medicating and everything.
Yeah,
So he went to this whole elaborate thing of saying that there was no chance for him to get it. But yeah, but we even talk. Let's talk about the description of the room. I mean, it's great. They have they mentioned the portraits of different like Hall of Fame worthy drunkards, and I thought that was one of the most descriptive parts of the novel. A lot of it's funny how we talk about old actors and we think of like people from like the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, but they had characters that are from like the 20s, that we don't even remember anymore. Which is interesting because back then it was like 50 years. Buster Keaton, I didn't know that he was one of those type of guys. Oh, John Barrymore.
okay.
We all know Drew Barrymore is Humphrey Bogart. He was he's his as a character, he's famous for having the Casablanca role and all those like drinking scenes. But I remember as a kid, Looney Tunes used to make fun of him as like being like a known like drunk.
Yeah,
Those he feels, of
he was.
course.
Yeah, Humphrey Bogart. I can't remember if I think it was the African Queen. Like they actually filmed it in Africa, but like the water wasn't. Was it? Yeah, I think it was African Queen. That was directed by John Huston, right?
I'm not sure.
Well, it was a movie that was directed by John Huston, and the water in the area was like tainted or whatever, or not, you know,
Purify,
yeah,
sick.
not
Yeah,
purified, and it would make
yeah.
people sick. So the entire crew got sick except for Humphrey Bogart and John Huston because the whole time they were just drinking whiskey.
Oh right, yeah,
They didn't drink anything but whiskey.
yeah. I mean,
So they were the only people on the cast that didn't get sick.
that's funny, but like that's kind of encouraged too. Like it was so hot. It was this thing I was working on, a documentary. It was in Africa, and they were not drinking Portland Spring. They were just drinking beer because they would sweat it out right away.
Yeah.
What else are you gonna drink? You know? Yeah, but we had W.C. Fields. He's like a character. He's very funny. But in real life too, that was his thing. I still don't even know if this is a real person or it's just a alternate thing where Trudy he describes the rest of her career. Do you remember that
Yeah,
part?
it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't a real person.
Okay, that's why I love because it's like an alternate reality.
Yeah.
And instead of, I assume, instead of making like Jackie Brown, he adapts or he makes a remake of a Dillinger movie.
Well, not well. Jackie Brown came out in '97. Our movie
Yeah,
would have came out in this alternate reality in 1999.
yeah. I'm assuming like maybe he did both still, but like it's Michael Madsen. Like, he mentions Michael Madsen and because I how Jackie Brown's in a book adapted from a book. This would have been an adapted from a remake from a movie that already happened. And I wonder if that's something he ever like toyed with because Michael Mann eventually made that Public Enemies. It was like I think he hypes that movie up. He thinks it's really good. He loves Michael Mann, so maybe I don't know, just like all the alternate reality stuff. And then you find out that she actually eventually got success. And then one of the key moments in this is the piano player, where we find out that there's a boy involved, like a 5-year-old boy who's a fan of Rick, Quint. So this is supposed to be Quentin Tarantino, and based on real life, where his stepdad was the piano bar player in LA in the 60s and I believe in the 70s. And apparently he did get something signed. I think he got, do you remember what he got signed in real life? Was it Vic Morrow from the Combat show, which they show a poster in it, Combat? Yeah. And so that's an important thing where I keep pushing the fact that this is a very autobiographical and very personal, not just for his love of movies, it's like love of things in his real life. So what'd you think of that part with the piano player?
I guess it was personal for him to put it in there, but it wasn't like particularly like interesting to me.
It just felt very Tarantino-ish, like where he's like, when a movie when it has like this,
Yeah.
well, you were his dude. I could just picture that being. It sounded like dialogue from a Tarantino movie.
Okay.
Yeah, like kind of like Fox Sports 5, Fox whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it just reminded me of like the dialogue from the films that we love. So that's how the chapter ends. Yes, it was Vic Morrow. Yeah, so it's just like, and it's like also blue collar too, where like you go to the bar after work and you just like be bullshit about instead of being a construction worker, you're bullshitting about making a pilot, and it's like everyday work. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. It's gonna be the next day. It's
Right.
it's blue. It's just like an everyday thing that sounds glamorous, but it's still you're still in a shitty watering hole and getting drunk.
Mm-hmm. So like what's like described throughout the book is and you see in a movie there's a house at the Playboy Mansion. I mean there's a party at the Playboy Mansion, and which actually would be an anachronism because they said like although there was a Playboy club in LA at the time in 1968
Nine,
69,
yeah.
he didn't buy the Playboy Mansion until like 1974.
Yeah, it was still in Chicago, right? I think or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So, but in the book, there was a party at the Playboy Mansion, and that Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski and all these different celebrities at the time were at. And apparently, during the party, Roman like committed to being on Playboy After Dark without consulting his wife Sharon, and she wanted like a quiet night at home. So the beginning of the chapter starts with them on the drive back from this, filming this TV special that she didn't feel like doing because, of course, she has like this persona. Celebrities don't just play characters; they also have like a persona. So she kind of had to play, doting, glamorous Sharon Tate when, in reality, she wanted to stay at home and read a book. So she was upset. Roman, how like married couples do when you get like the silent treatment. And he, long story short, he decides to make things up to her by having a pool party at like, the middle of the night, basically. And they invite all of their friends over. And of course, to go up to their house, you pass Rick's house. So Rick's out, watering his lawn and
Yeah.
listening to trying to run lines with his tape recorder. And it was interesting because it made it seem like he had like seven hands, because they said he had his whiskey sour and his like German flask, in his German stein in one hand, and he's watering plants, and he had his tape recorder. So it was just interesting how he described it. But Steve McQueen, directly after finally clarifying the Great Escape story, drives up, and then you come to find out that not only is this person he has this infamous that he's paired with in this infamous story about him losing out this role, they also actually knew each other, because Steve McQueen was on a show in the 60s. He had a show, and of course, in this universe, Bounty Law, where Rick Dalton was playing Jack Cahill, Jake Cahill was on at the same time. So apparently they hung out with each other and they played pool against each other 2 out of 3. Steve McQueen pulls up, and out of his, he's looking at people driving up, and he notices it's Steve. So he calls to him like, "Hey, Steve." He's like, "Rick," and it describes like Rick in his head is like, "Oh, yeah." So he remembers me. I think he had the like the poster of himself in a driveway, and he's like, "That's your house." I'm like, what did
Yeah,
you
that's
get
what
out of
happens.
that part? Yeah,
Yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, I could, just pay for it. But again, it's very self-deprecating. A lot of things that Rick says. The same thing with earlier where he was when he clarifies the Great Escape story. He's like, yeah, let's pay for it. I can live up here. I can afford to live up here. I'm right next door to where you're going.
yeah.
Type of thing where it's still again like a pissing contest. But I
And
really did enjoy
not
the pool
only
for
that,
pool.
but what I never realized in all my time, like hearing about like the Tate LaBianca murders, I didn't realize that they didn't own that house. Like they were renting it. So it's ironic the house that he was going to was rented, and Rick's house
Yeah,
was was
yeah, because
bought and owned.
that was a big part of earlier in the book too, in the film, like where owning means
Yeah,
you're not just visiting LA. Like I'm from here. That's a big thing, and it's a status symbol, but it's like it's reassuring that he's a success. But it's interesting that they were renting. They were drifters, you could say, just like the other Manson people were like drifters, but these people were like glamorous drifters, which that's a big thing in LA. Everyone's from somewhere else. But yeah, Steve McQueen part, that was interesting. But the
yeah,
actual game though, let's get to the actual billiards. Like where like I could have had you. It was kind of
yeah.
like that, where it's like, nah, you could have had me, but he's like, no, but I'm serious. And it was like one more shot of that. But it's better off that we just like leave as
Yeah, and
a mystery.
it was one of those things where like Rick start, I think, and this is like the final few pages of the book where Rick kind of like faces reality, or at least accepts reality, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But you hear him saying it to himself. He's like, before Steve McQueen like drives off into the driveway of the Polanskis. He says, "Yeah, we gotta have a rematch or whatever." And like Rick in his head, he's like, I know this. He was like, "Sure," and it says Rick says, knowing this rematch will never happen, like that type of thing.
Kind of like if we like to talk about sports, like a minor league guy like striking out an all-time great, like who eventually became an all-time great, but like, oh, I struck him out in little league, or I struck him out in minor league A ball, that type of thing. And
Yeah,
it's like I'd rather just hold on to that than bring it up again, and reality hit me where it's like, nah, this is Steve McQueen, and I'm Rick Dalton.
yeah, and it's interesting because like at no other point, when the Great Escape stuff is coming up, and it's like, well, I did know Steve, and Steve knows me. We played billiards when we were on, television. Like he never brings that up as like, oh, I was where he was where I was at one point.
But in the film, because we're comparing them now and contrasting them, when they do show Rick in the film, like imposed into the film, it's kind of like, is it the question I had was, is it this is him showing that yeah, I could have done the scene, or is it just like when I saw it the first time, I thought it was just like a throwaway special effect thing, but after reading the book, it was a deeper thing where it's like, no, if I was in this scene, if I was in this film, it still would have been a hit. You know, it wasn't just because it was Steve McQueen. Like it could have been my movie, and
Mhm.
I would have did it. You know, it would have been like, so here's a proof. Literally, we filmed it. Like this is would have been. Did we skip 24, the Nebraska gym? That's just a quick little chapter, but let me just remind you, it's again, it's talking about because like one of the main themes of this is Rick trying to find a second life in foreign films, you know, like
Mhm.
when you're overseas, and they tell the story of Lex Barker, and he played a character kind of like your man James Bond, but it was like a western, and he did it for like, all right, I'll do it. He went to Germany and did like German westerns. I'm gonna say something else. He did German westerns, and it was a hit, but like no one knows about it in America. So like he was still making money, but he did it for a few films, and then the character lived on. It's Old Shatterhand, and this is something I didn't know about. Like, this is interesting to me. Like they made westerns all over the place. They made like Asian ones too. But
Yeah.
Germany had their own like cinema. It's like another xenophobic layer to the book where it's like going over there is like less than. But
Mhm.
they just give the backstory of like again, we're comparing real people with a fictitious character in Rick Dalton, but like Aldo Ray, Lex Barker. Yeah, so it's kind of like I'm assuming like in my like fantasy of like this character in the future, I want to see Rick Dalton and like Cliff working on like a late 70s like film somewhere, you know, not just westerns. Like I want to see like it keep going because they mentioned how Lex Barker like went on to do other things like exploitation and stuff like that. So that's just one of these like quick chapters that
Yeah. So
they
what you're
bring up.
describing, Marvin Swartz calls him,
Mm.
and this is the second appearance of him in the book. But in the movie, he didn't. Outside of the opening scene, like he appeared, but he didn't talk. Like Al Pacino didn't have any other lines in the movie outside of the opening scene. But he actually calls him on the phone, and he's telling him like, "Yeah, I got you this job in Europe if you should take it." And Rick's like still apprehensive, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do like the next pilot season. You know, maybe I'll catch on, maybe something." And Marvin Swartz kind of like just was like, "Listen, like, dude, it's over in Hollywood. Nobody's like waiting for like the second career of Rick Dalton, which apparently happens because of the climax of the film, which is kind of like a one paragraph thing in the book, which is the Manson family invading his house and him and Cliff like fighting them off, and he's a celebrity again because it's all over like world news. But before the that's the interesting part. Like the book ends before all of that, and he basically tells them like this is a way for you to reinvent yourself. If you're not big in Hollywood, but you could be big as hell in Spain, Italy,
Big,
Germany, France.
big in Japan. That's an old phrase. Oh, he's big in Japan. That's what they'd
Yeah,
always say
and
about
like
like music.
what do people do now? It's like, oh, we have to make this movie marketable to China because
Mm.
there's billions of dollars over in China to be got. But this is like 50 years ago, so people weren't thinking that way. So I kind of like in it, like telling people, all right, like go over to Europe and do movies in Europe. It was kind of like telling somebody like, okay, like you're not gonna be starring in this like tentpole movie franchise film or even this Oscar baiting movie. But I got this mini series for you on Netflix. Like you'd be starring in it, 8 1 hour, 8 1 hour episodes. You could get an Emmy out of it possibly, and perhaps that's a really hard sell to like movie stars. Probably not so much now because next Netflix money is huge,
Mm.
and a lot of the streaming services like that money is huge. But
Big,
that's
yeah,
kind of like the parallel or kind of like the analogy I can make to relate it to what it would be like today.
yeah. Today, and just in general, it's like the pond, like like the small fish, big pond, and it's like you go to a smaller pond,
Hmm.
get that second chance, reincarnation, your career. But there's like, what's this Rick's fucking problem? Like Marvin.
Yeah.
It's like when you weren't looking, the culture changed. Is
Hmm.
what he says. Like you're still rocking the fucking pompadour. You know, like he's like, look at you. Elvis doesn't even wear a pompadour. And it's like, yeah, because like 69, you know, like Elvis he did his return and that circa 70, and he changed his look. It kind of reminds me of like all this, like, you know, the anger that Rick has. It reminds me of like these MAGA actors, like Kevin Sorbo, like purposely trying to like shit on, like, because he keeps on shitting on hippies in this. These hippie ethic, you know. It reminds me like Kevin Sorbo doing like, oh, I gotta make a woke bullshit movie.
Yeah.
Shut up, Kevin Sorbo. Go, you're not gonna make a movie again. You know, you're never gonna make it. So it's like, you know, you're blaming society or culture, but like it's not that. You know, that's what I popped in my head because I think when I read this, like Kevin Sorbo was in the news for doing some stupid shit. I think.
Yeah, as usual.
Yeah.
But then he hangs up the phone and gets, you know, he thinks to himself, and then he gets another phone call very unexpectedly.
Yes.
From his 8-year-old co-star, Trudy, yet again. And he's like, you know, what the hell? It's like,
yeah, should I be talking to you? Like, does your mom know I'm talking to you?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, you know, late night call. It's weird.
Yeah, and then they actually go over the scenes, the upcoming scene that they're supposed to do, which is like the big scene, which apparently in the movie was the scene where Wayne Maunder's character, who was played by the late great Luke Perry, goes to get Marabella back from Caleb, who's holding her at the saloon. And you know, she's talking to him, and she's basically, it's a long conversation to get into and all the different stuff that was described, but by the end of the call he starts to appreciate his entire career and his entire life. And it's just this idea that like there's so many people, like for every like 1,000 people that try to become like movie actors or be in the movies, like 10 of them actually get to be in movies, and maybe like one of them becomes like a superstar. So the fact that he was able to do films, have his own TV show, have all of these guest spots, and is getting ready to embark on his second career in Europe, he starts to appreciate that, the fact that he has a house, the fact that he got to sleep with all of these women, kiss all of these famous actresses, work alongside all these famous actors. Like think about all the different actors he talked about that he co-starred with in films. So, you know, once upon a time in Hollywood, I think in his mind he had this movie. He was living in this movie where, you know, he's the star, but then he steps back and like looks at the whole, you know, his whole life, and finally faces reality and is like, man, I'm a lucky son of a bitch. Like, I need to appreciate this, you know?
It's like that one of the great moments in Cheers, or one of our favorite shows, when Sam's like, I'm the luckiest son of a bitch. You know, that whole thing?
Yeah.
Appreciate where you're at and everything. And he can sleep. Like the night before, he couldn't sleep, but like, you know, he'd fucking pass out. This one, he could probably just like, all right, go to sleep on his own. And it was comforting and very self-reflective, which is a great thing to do in art.
Yeah, and it was a very subdued ending. Like the movie, if the movie ended on this ending, it's like, oh man, what is this like boring shit? Like, you know, like.
Well, it actually reminded me of True Detective ending, where that seemed very like anticlimactic. Where like, remember, did you watch that? Where like it just okay, so like something happens, a big moment happens, like a kind of like a go in here, let's get the bad guy type thing, and then like 20 minutes later it ends. It's just them two guys like BSing in the parking lot, and like you just see like you know, like look up to the stars, and it's like tomorrow's another day. They're gonna still be there. Nothing crazy happened. It's just very, very subtle, and it's like, yeah, it's like real. But yeah, I mean, and we do also get like we get Rick Dalton. He has closure with Steve McQueen too. That's a huge part of it. But in the book, like he's outsmarting him, or he knows, like he still has like the upper hand in his mind in the book. And I just love the dialogue. I love the way he writes the character. Tarantino writes the character, where he's like, "Yep, that's the house that Bounty Law built." It's like, Bounty Law built that, and he's like, "No, that's an expression." And then you know, then it's in his head. It's like, "Don't fuck," and it's just like, you know, we've been in that same situation where we're like talking to someone, and you're just like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and then you're just like, "God, this guy's a freaking bimbo," you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a very relatable character. I know it's also a movie, but like one of the great characters I've I've read, you know, because it's layered.
Yeah, my only I wouldn't say criticism, but my only gripe is like I really wish Cliff had like an actual ending, because after rewatching the movie and reading the book, like Cliff is probably like one of the most interesting characters ever. And it's like I kind of want to see where he goes on. Like I likened it, like I'm enamored with him after the movie, after the book. And I think about the only, and he's one of the few Quentin Tarantino characters where it's like, oh, I want to see where like he goes on after this. And the only other person like in a movie, in one of his movies, I felt that way was Jules in Pulp Fiction, where, and it's a lot of rumors of, because he's of course going to come out with more and more books, because he's, you know segueing into being a novelist. So there's so many stories, people are saying I could do, which was, the Vega brothers, which he had to abandon as being an actual film project because John Travolta and Michael Madsen obviously can't play younger versions of their characters from the 90s, or something that would have had to happen like in the 90s, or at worse the early 2000s. And then another story he could tell is what Jules went on to do when he walked the earth, like came
Kung
from
Fu.
Kung Fu.
Yeah.
And then, another one would be seeing where Cliff Booth was in, where he went on to go, or maybe even his exploits in the war, elaborate on that, and what happened immediately after, other than him like killing 3 mobsters.
Cliff, like that's perfect character to keep going. Like they could do like a comic book where it's like realistic,
Yeah.
but have him look like Captain America, but then like it's really just the next page you turn over and he's like in like a brothel, or like he's like doing some like sleazy thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so when she says, Trudy says to Rick, you pretend to be a cowboy, but to sum up the two characters that we've been following for 400 pages and a month in a movie. So like Rick is like he's like the boy, and he's pretending to be a cowboy, and Cliff is literally a cowboy. Like he's a stuntman, he's done all this stuff, and he doesn't need closure, I don't think, or it's like he's gonna be walking the earth. So I agree with you on that. Rick needs attention, he needs reassurance and everything. It's kind of like the yin and yang, where it's like it's the same. Like this could be the same person. It could be like I have two sides. It could be like I feel like Rick sometimes, but I also like know I can be Cliff sometimes too. It's kind of like that, where need be. I can
that dichotomy.
Yeah, and that's what's the best. That's it's balance.
Yeah, and it's like Quentin Tarantino is actually trying to develop Bounty Law into like an actual series. So, but it's just an idea now. It's in development. So who's to say that's what's gonna happen?
Never say never, because during this whole month, I saw Tarantino mention I'm gonna write a book. Yes, it's gonna be in, like he said, in 15 years about so, or 20. And he did it. Like everything he said he's gonna do, he's done.
Yeah.
Which is very admirable, I think.
Yeah, I really, I mean, this is off topic, but I really hope he had an idea to kind of do essentially like a side quill or in universe like sequel to Inglorious Bastards, which would have been, Killer Crow. That's probably, aside from the Vega brothers or Double V Vega, whatever it was gonna be called, and Kill Bill Volume 3, the most well-known unproduced movie that he didn't get to do was Killer Crow, which would have been Inglorious Bastards in the Inglorious Bastards universe, but it would be following some black POWs where like Germans want to kill them, but at the same time, the United States doesn't give a shit about them because they're black. I just think it would be interesting for a movie.
That would have been perfect. It's very much Suicide Squad, or like like a suicide mission, where it's like the government is making you go, and when you come back, you're not going to be heroes anyway. That type of thing. So it's like, let's just do it for us. That type of
deal. Like his inspiration for it was the Dirty Dozen.
Right. That's what I meant.
With Lee Marvin and Ernest Borgnine and Jim Brown. And it had like a lot of names to it, like Eddie Murphy. I believe Jamie Foxx was attached to it, but he kicked around what eventually became Django and Hateful Eight as far back as when he was doing Jackie Brown.
Mm.
And he was kicking around Kill Bill like for many years after Jackie Brown had finally made it. So it
Yeah.
wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for him to develop that into a film.
Again, to sum this up as well, this was a exercise. This was a thing to clear his palette. Like he finished Kill Bill, or he'll finish Jackie Brown, and he like pick up just characters and see where it would go. Then he would put it
Mhm.
away. He put that away. He came back to this after Hateful Eight, and then he made it. But when Django was done, he was doing like graphic novels, like storylines, and
Mhm.
he had one. And while he was writing it, he realized that the character was too old. He was like, like it would have had to be Jimmy Fox in like 15, 20 years, 30 years. And it ended up being, he saw Sam Jackson playing him, and he ended up being the Hateful Eight character. That
Yeah.
grew out of Django.
Yeah, just before we wrap up, I just want to talk about other little knickknacks I noticed when I rewatched the movie. So going back to the Bruce Lee fight, reading about it and then watching the movie, I do know that Brad Pitt and I think the stunt coordinator felt it would be disrespectful to make the fight as long as it was in the book, but I felt like it would have worked better because it would have made the two, to me, it would have made them look equally matched. And the only thing I find like offensive, or the only thing I could see somebody finding offensive, is that they had Bruce Lee, the person, being acted out like how Bruce Lee's characters, acted out, like, the sounds, the wah and all that stuff. And it just, like, I don't think he did that type of shit in real life. Like when he practiced martial arts, it was just to add to the movies. But I still feel like his family would still be in their feelings because they to this day I still don't understand what their issue is. Lots of deleted scenes were in the book. What I stated before, they had the Red Apple commercial. Would you take
Oh
a bite
yeah.
of a Red Apple? Down to the, yeah, it had the African American, it had the black woman with the big afro saying, "Ooh, yeah," and it was the girl from Love Don't Cost a Thing, and she was in Django. I forgot her name, but she's been in Quentin Tarantino's stuff before. Oh, and this is, when I said before that certain scenes have added significance because of the context of the book. So as you stated, she went on to have a career as a multi-time Academy Award nominee, respected actress, and all that stuff. So there's a scene, and it was like the scene I really like hook. It's a Quentin Tarantino movie, so I'm saying it regardless. But the scene where I was like, "Ooh, this is gonna be really good." When I think when they showed it in the trailer, it was like very towards the end, and then they cut off like the background music where she's whispering in his ear. That is the best acting I've ever seen in my whole
Mm.
life. And he starts crying, and in the movie, it was like a really good scene. But it adds significance, especially when you realize, in the few scenes that Trudy was in, you could tell she was really serious about, the craft of acting, but they elaborated on it a lot more in the book. So I think the reason why he started crying is because he knew this girl is going to become a great actress throughout her career. As a matter of fact, it says in the book that every time she was nominated for an Academy Award, he was rooting for her. So I think in his mind, Rick Dalton, he's thinking in his head, like, if that was the best acting she ever saw in her whole life, every single scene partner she has for the rest of her life, the rest of her career, will always be compared to him. Like, did you get that when you, or was that just me?
Well, no, there's a lot of undertones of that where it's like, yes, she's an 8-year-old girl, but it's like he respects her, so it's like you'll never have another like me type of thing.
Yeah,
And that's like weird because it's a girl, but a little girl, but yeah, you live on. Like there's a reason why they talk about like the legacy of different eras in this,
yeah,
because that's how you live on. We're reading about it in a book in 2021, and it's like this is how you live on. You live on through the next generation because they can just like badmouth you, or they can just like delete you. They can just
yeah.
say, oh, and he'll live. So then she'll be like, which I also like that he lived till 2000 at least, which I like the Rick Dalton character.
This
But that's
other.
like that. No, well, he rooted for her in 99.
Oh, okay, right,
You know
right,
what I mean?
right,
So I'm
right, right.
assuming,
Okay.
but I like that. you mentioned but that was my takeaway on that. Bruce Lee, I thought it was like harsher in the book where he was kind of comparing him to he was like he was like a workout guy, fitness guy for the stars, and that's why he was trying to get in. I mean, it's not a bad thing. Like he's hustling, trying to get his like screenplay made, which is like, what happened. It was a parallel with the chapter earlier on with Manson trying to like hustle his way into the music thing, where he's like just another like schmuck, like everyone else trying to make it, and like it kind of like humanizes him. I know Charles Manson's hard to humanize him, but he humanizes him like that. And then they show the way they show that in the movie of Bruce Lee. It's like they show that cool scene with Sharon Tate washing herself, and they show her like working out with Bruce Lee real quick, and that's the only like head nod that he worked with her, Sharon Tate. But in the book, it was got more into like the backstory of like what he was doing. And films are way different than books. Obviously, every medium is different. You don't have to. You show, you don't tell in movies, and that's how he showed it. He showed it in 1 second of them, and that's why Tarantino's good.
Speaking of showing and not telling, also I forgot the other like scene that was in the deleted scenes, and I was like, I thought it was in a movie when Charles Manson goes to the house to look for one of the Beach Boys or whatever, and they send him Jay Sebring sends him down to the landlord. And it's a lot shorter than it was in a book, the conversation, but it's kind of like the same vibe where he's like, oh yeah, what do you do? I'm a manager, you know that, Charlie. Oh yeah, do you think I could come and like play for you and all that stuff? And then down to him going back to the Twinkie truck and interacting with Cliff or trying to interact with Cliff, and down to the what the fuck was that? Like we've all been there, like when we work together and some crazy ass or some weird dude comes in and does shit, and I turn the mic and I'm like, what?